Money can't buy happiness, they say. Well, it couldn't buy these owners a good reputation. Today I'm going to talk about who I think are the worst sports owners of all time. Play the intro. When I say of all time, I mean past owners. So current terrible owners like James Dolan, John Fisher, the Pegulas, the Adelson family, seriously, what is going on in Dallas, and other owners aren't in this video, mainly because their legacies aren't solidified. Owners like Harold Ballard, Donald Sterling, Dan Snyder, and others won't be mentioned mainly because those are future videos with their antics. Let's begin. Bill Wirtz, Chicago Blackhawks, 1983 to 2007. Let's see, a complete cheap-ass who had home games blacked out on television because it was unfair to season ticket holders, Bill Wirtz ran the Hawks on the cheap for most of his ownership. Fans nicknamed him Dollar Bill for a reason. Bill inherited the Hawks from his father, Arthur, in 1983. The Wirtz family made their fortune in booze, liquor, and alcohol, so they weren't hurting financially. Wirtz is blamed for allowing Bobby Hull to leave for the WHA and for the Blackhawks having a near half-century-long cup drought from 1961 to 2010. And to top it all off, ESPN declared the Blackhawks as the worst franchise in pro sports in 2004. In late September of 2007, Wirtz passed away due to cancer. Is it a good thing or a bad thing that Blackhawks fans booed Wirtz when he was honored at the first home game after his death? I would say Rocky Wirtz did better than his dad, but well, you know what? Let's just move on. Marge Schott, Cincinnati Reds, 1984 to 1996. Marge Schott is one of the few female owners to win a championship as majority owner, but she's also on this list. Marge struck it rich when she inherited the Schott car dealership after her husband Charles died. Not to mention Marge acquired other investments. But how bad could Marge Schott have been? She won a World Series after all. True, but that was in spite of her actions. She didn't raise ticket prices and hot dogs were only $1. But cheap prices include cheap ownership. For example, the 1990 World Series. The Reds swept the Oakland A's but won the series too fast, robbing Marge of glorious profit. Screw the players then. They want food, they can go to McDonald's. Retired numbers and championship banners celebrating the Big Red Machine? That's too expensive. What else? She didn't like facial hair, she didn't know that Chicago and Cincinnati had different time zones, she spied on players when they were on the road, and worst of all, she couldn't keep her mouth shut. Schott said things like, only fruits wear earrings, referred to players like Dave Parker and Eric Davis as million-dollar N-bombs, and she said that Mustache Man was good for Germany because he rebuilt the roads, because what's a bad owner without moral corruption? MLB had enough and forced Marge to sell the Reds in 1996. Just remember, Reds fans, anytime Phil Castellini opens his mouth and says something stupid, just remember Marge Schott. Hugh Culverhouse, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 1976 to 1994. Urinating Tree made a video about Hugh Culverhouse which goes into more detail. Do watch it after this, it's a great video. Long story short, he was cheaper than Mr. Krabs and didn't win much. One person put it best. He didn't care for the stat line, the score line, or the goal line. He was only interested in the bottom line. If that sounds bad, how about not getting the first win until game number 27 of their existence? If no, then how about every star player leaving when they demand a raise? Even worse, he was having affairs behind his wife's back. Culverhouse died of lung cancer in 1994, and after many legal battles, the Bucs were sold to the Glazers. By the way, most people don't know this, but he nearly bought the Rams in 1972, which would have completely jacked up the NFL timeline. Bucs fans are fortunate that the Glazers aren't Hugh Culverhouse. Charles Comiskey, Chicago White Sox, 1901 to 1934. When people talk about the 1919 World Series, few people seem to ask why the White Sox threw the series. A big reason why the 8 Black Sox players threw the series was because of owner Charles Comiskey. Comiskey was a former player. In fact, he played for the St. Louis Brown Stockings. The White Sox won the World Series in 1906 and 1917, but it was kinda in spite of Comiskey. Players had to wash their own uniforms and weren't given much meal money on the road. The players that threw the series weren't as educated as the higher paid players, which Comiskey took advantage of. Notorious gambler Sport Sullivan saw an opportunity and convinced the 8 players to throw the series. The whole Black Sox scandal deserves a video of its own. Put it this way, the White Sox never won a World Series until 2005. The White Sox of today aren't any good, but there aren't any reports that the 2024 White Sox were paid by gamblers to lose. Actually, that would be ironic. George Preston Marshall, Boston Braves / Washington Redskins, 1932 to 1965. How many people knew the Washington Redskins / football team / name redacted / commanders / you get the point originally started in Boston? Marshall's parents owned a local newspaper and his dad later bought a laundromat, which George started working at. In 1932, he and a group of partners founded an NFL team. They were named the Braves as they played on the same field as the baseball Braves, also in Boston. After hiring Lone Star Dietz, who claimed to be a Native American, Marshall changed the name of the team to the Redskins. In 1937, due to lackluster support, Marshall moved the Skins to Washington, D.C. Marshall's biggest problem was, well, he was a racist. A big one. It certainly hurt that the Redskins were the only team south of the Mason-Dixon line during the 40s and 50s. When NFL teams began integrating, Marshall refused, claiming it would alienate Southern fans. It got so bad that Bobby Kennedy and U.S. Interior Secretary Stuart Udall threatened to revoke the Skins' lease in D.C. Stadium unless they integrated. Marshall relented in 1962. Marshall died in 1969, and the team changed owners. And Washington wouldn't have any other bad owners again. Ted Stepien, Cleveland Cavaliers, 1980 to 1983. Stepien was successful in the advertising industry, but basketball isn't like advertising. He bought a majority share of the Cleveland Cavaliers in the midst of a chaotic assumption of control in the early 80s. There were red flags before he took control. Stepien had made some offensive comments before, like saying the Indians were owned by, quote, the Jewish clique, and if he owned the team, he would make half the team white because, quote, white people need white heroes. This is Ted Stepien, not Donald Sterling. But he said it was complicated and denied being a racist, so the NBA allowed it. Stepien made some clueless moves. He brought in Bill Musselman, a coach who the fans hated before due to a fight between Ohio State and his old coaching job, Minnesota. He also hired a GM whose resume was coach of Stepien's pro softball team. No front office experience. Pretty soon, a whirlwind of trades happened, which saw black players getting traded for white players. It's almost as if Stepien was doing what he said he would do. And if you think those are the worst trades, you don't know what's coming. Stepien's band of idiots sent away their first-round picks to the Dallas Mavericks for some reason. In 3 separate trades in the 80-81 season, Dallas had the Cavaliers' first-round picks in 1983, 84, 85, and 86. It got so bad that the NBA froze all Cavaliers transactions. All trades needed league approval. And it turns out when you trade away the one thing that could make your terrible team great, the fans will walk away. The team was awful and attendance plummeted. He also got rid of beloved announcer Joe Tate, sued a radio station, and physically fought a few reporters because they hurt his feelings. Stepien also went crazy spending money on free agency with a bunch of flops and burning through head coaches galore. There was also a time where he threw a champagne party in the locker room after the Cavs hit loss number 67. And while we're at it, he once threatened to move the Cavs to Pittsburgh. A few years later, he made plans to move them to Toronto and rename them the Towers. Yes, that was going to be a thing. The Toronto Towers were on the verge of taking the court at Maple Leaf Gardens. But then, Stepien changed his mind and sold the Cavs to the Gunn brothers in 1983 for $20 million. Dan Gilbert is far from one of the best owners in the NBA, but he's automatically better than Stepien. Bill Bidwell, the St. Louis/Phoenix/Arizona Cardinals, 1962 to 2019. Bill inherited the Cards from his dad Charles Sr. in 1962 with his brother Charles Jr. Bill became sole owner in 1972. Bill Bidwell wasn't at all competent. He was cheap, he installed himself as GM, he made incompetent moves, he left St. Louis for Phoenix because he wanted warmer weather, and the Cardinals made the Super Bowl only once in his tenure. They lost that game to the Steelers. Bill passed away in 2019, giving ownership control to his son Michael. Don't think Michael Bidwell is any better, if the Cliff Kingsbury era will tell you anything. Anthony Precourt, Columbus Crew / Columbus Crew SC, 2012 to 2019. When I say Anthony Precourt, I'm talking about when he owned the Crew, not Austin FC. Major League Soccer is pretty young, so there haven't been any real bad owners. Anthony Precourt is an outlier. The only reason he's on this list is he tried to move the Crew to Austin in 2017. The fans were relentless, and eventually both parties got their wish. The Crew were sold to another terrible owner in Jimmy Haslam, and Precourt got his team in Austin. At least Haslam hasn't meddled in the Crew's management. Might as well mention Del Loy Hansen, formerly of Real Salt Lake, who made some racist comments. Major League Soccer hasn't had many bad owners. As of yet. Michael Jordan, Charlotte Bobcats / Hornets, 2006 to 2023. Okay, I have to put an asterisk on this one. He is technically a minority owner and alternate governor, but he sold a majority stake, so he's on the list. His front office tenure with the Wizards wasn't great, so what does Bob Johnson do? Sell Jordan a minority stake with complete control of basketball ops. Jordan's time as owner in Charlotte was awful, no matter the name of the team. Giving out anchor contracts to make anyone try to stay, swinging and missing on every draft pick not named Kemba Walker, then lowballing Kemba Walker and overpaying Terry Rozier. The Hornets only made the playoffs a few times, and the times they did make it, they were an easy out. The good news is Jordan is no longer in charge of basketball operations. Does this mean the Hornets are finally free? I have no idea. Atlanta Spirit, Atlanta Thrashers 2004 to 2011, and Atlanta Hawks 2004 to 2015. I did cover Atlanta Spirit's interest in the Thrashers in a previous video, but I never mentioned their insistent meddling in the Hawks. Atlanta Spirit was created only because Ted Turner and Time Warner were going broke due to a disastrous merger with AOL. For one example, Joe Johnson got a mega contract while they claimed the Thrashers were lost the money hand over fist. When they weren't trying to sell the Thrashers to anyone who looked at them funny, they were suing former partner Scott Belkin over who had what control. Whatever momentum the Thrashers had from making the playoffs in 2007 was quashed, and they would be sold to a group from Winnipeg in 2011. The Hawks, however, were trapped with Atlanta Spirit for another few years. In September 2014, majority owner Bruce Leveson announced he would be selling his stake after a racist email from 2012 was discovered where he blamed low attendance on African American fans. In January of 2015, the rest of Atlanta Spirit announced they would sell their stakes as well. A few months later, the group sold the Hawks and Phillips Arena to a group led by Tony Ressler. Bud Adams, Houston Oilers / Tennessee Titans, 1960 to 2013. An Oklahoma-born oil baron, Bud Adams founded the Houston Oilers and was a charter member of the American Football League in 1960. Adams was notorious for meddling in team affairs. The 1993 season, which saw the Oilers experience the highest of highs, despite the amounts of drama, only to be heartbroken in the playoffs against the Chiefs. Adams blew up the core and alienated the fan base. He wanted a new stadium and demanded that Houston pay for a good chunk of it. But the city was sour after he blew up the core and turned the Oilers into a shell of themselves. With no other options, Adams moved the Oilers to Tennessee. It wouldn't get better in Tennessee. Originally meant to be Nashville's team, the Oilers played a season at Liberty Bowl Memorial Stadium in Tennessee, then a season at Vanderbilt Stadium, then finally got their own stadium and a new name, the Titans. The Titans did make the Super Bowl in 1999, but they didn't win much else during his time as owner. Adams passed away in 2013, handing over ownership to his daughters, Susan Adams Smith and Amy Adams Strunk. The Titans now are... at least Bud Adams isn't meddling all the time. Virginia Hollis McCaskey, Chicago Bears, 1983 to 2025. My condolences do go out to the Hollis McCaskey family and the Bears organization for her passing. But when you look at it, Virginia was terrible at her job. Completely cheap, fired the GM after a 14-2 season, fired Mike Ditka, which Bears fans cry about to this day, allowed the renovations of Soldier Field to happen, and got rid of cheerleaders after the only Super Bowl win. Are the Bears in better hands? I don't know. It starts by bringing back the Honey Bears, and then selling the team. Do the right thing, George. William Clay Ford Sr., Detroit Lions, 1963 to 2014. And speaking of incompetent NFC North owners, William Clay Ford Sr. You ever wondered why it took the Lions so long to become a true contender? Ford was too loyal to players and executives when they needed to go. And when he eventually did get rid of them, he replaced them with worse options. This was the guy who hired Matt Millen as GM. When Millen thought he was unqualified, Ford said, "You're smart, you'll figure it out." Spoiler, he did not figure it out. And of course, 0-16. I almost forgot. Not one but two generational talents in Barry Sanders and Calvin Johnson retired in their prime and wanted nothing to do with the team for so long. The Lions won only one playoff game in WCF Sr.'s time as owner. William died in 2014. Thank God Martha Ford and Sheila Ford Hamp aren't as incompetent as WCF. Well, except for the whole Matt Patricia and copying the Patriots thing, but that's in the past. Robert Sarver, Phoenix Suns and Mercury, 2004 to 2023. Robert Sarver didn't get as much attention when James Dolan was hogging all the spotlight. Sarver was a banker and co-founded a real estate company across the southwestern United States. He bought the Suns in 2004, and his only accomplishments were firing 7 coaches in 7 years and being a meddling, sexist, and racist person. It's odd considering that he was the same person who objected to an Arizona bill that made it a crime to be an undocumented person in Arizona. The Suns did make the NBA Finals in 2021, but they haven't done much else since. Oh, I almost forgot. He also owned the Mercury of the WNBA. They did win 3 championships, but how much influence did Sarver have over it? The NBA did suspend Sarver due to his comments and actions. Sarver was finally forced out in December 2022 when he sold the team to Matt Ishbia. Good riddance. Jerry Richardson, Carolina Panthers, 1995 to 2018. Jerry Richardson was a former NFL player who used his NFL championship bonus to open a Hardee's and begin a fast food empire across the United States. In 1995, he brought an expansion team to Charlotte, which became the Carolina Panthers. It seemed steady until December 2017, when Sports Illustrated published a report that several Panthers employees were compensated due to allegations of sexual misconduct and alleged racism by Richardson. Richardson immediately announced he would be selling the team. There's also the statue of him outside of Bank of America Stadium that was gifted by the minority owners, but that isn't as important. He sold the team to David Tepper in 2018, who is... he might be learning from his mistakes. Maybe. So what can we learn from these owners? Well, if you are rich and own a sports team, don't be a piece of shit. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I'll see you in the next video.